My father handed my brother the keys to the family business on a Sunday afternoon, right in the middle of my grandmother's birthday dinner, while I was still holding a fork. He didn't even stand up to do it, just reached into his jacket pocket, pulled out a small brass key on a ring, and slid it across the tablecloth like he was passing the salt. My brother caught it without looking up from his plate. My mother smiled the way she always smiled when something had already been decided without me. My father looked at me then, directly at me, and said, "We thought you'd be happier doing something more your speed." He pushed a folded piece of paper toward me. I picked it up. It was a printout from Indeed. Office administrator, entry level, a company 3 towns over, $12 an hour. I was 31 years old. I had been running the operations side of that business for 4 years. I didn't say a word. I folded the paper back along its original crease, set it next to my water glass, and asked my grandmother if she wanted more sweet tea. That was the moment everything changed. Not because I snapped. Not because I finally screamed a thing I'd been swallowing for years. But because somewhere between reaching for that pitcher and pouring it into her glass, I made a decision so quiet that no one at that table heard it. They would. Let me back up, because you need to understand how we got here. Hartwell and Sons Mechanical had been in my family since my grandfather started it out of a rented garage in Knoxville, Tennessee in 1979. By the time I was old enough to understand what the business actually was, commercial HVAC, mostly industrial contracts, a few municipal accounts, it was bringing in around $2 million a year. Not enormous by any measure, but steady. My grandfather had built it slow and careful, the way people did back then, handshake by handshake. He handed it to my father when he retired in 2008. That transition was clean, documented, planned. I know because I helped my grandfather organize the paperwork the summer before my senior year of high school. I was 17 and I spent 3 weeks in his office learning how to read a balance sheet. My grandfather taught me things he never taught anyone else in that family. He showed me the accounts, the contracts, the vendor relationships. He said, "You have a head for this, Laurel. Don't let anybody tell you otherwise." My brother was 20 at the time, already in his second year of community college for the second time, working part-time at a sporting goods store. Nobody asked him to organize any paperwork, but he had the right last name, or rather, he had the right first name. My grandfather's name was Franklin Hartwell. My brother's name is Franklin Hartwell. My brother's name is Franklin Hartwell III. I am just Laurel. That has always been the whole of it, really. That has always been the entire explanation. I came back to Knoxville at 26 after 5 years in Atlanta, where I had gotten an actual operations management degree and then worked for a mid-sized logistics company long enough to understand how real businesses function. I came back because my father called and said he needed help. The business was struggling. He had lost 2 major contracts, the office manager had quit, and the guy running their scheduling software didn't actually know how to run scheduling software. I moved home. I took a salary that was half what I'd been making in Atlanta. I told myself it was temporary. Within 18 months, I had renegotiated 2 vendor contracts, implemented a job tracking system that cut their scheduling errors by 60%, and brought in a new municipal maintenance account with the city of Knoxville worth about $340,000 annually. I did this while also answering phones, managing payroll, and covering the front desk when the receptionist called out sick, which was often. My father told me I was doing a great job. He told me this at least once a week. He said it the way you'd tell a houseplant it was thriving. My brother, meanwhile, had decided he wanted to learn the trade, which was fine, good even. Someone needed to eventually manage the technicians, and I wasn't going to do everything forever. So he started going out on jobs. He was decent at the hands-on work. I'll give him that. He could diagnose a failing compressor. He had the personality for talking to clients on site. What he could not do was file a piece of paper correctly, remember a deadline, or show up to a meeting on time. These are not small things when you are running a business, but my father saw what he wanted to see. He saw his son learning the trade, the way he had learned the trade, the way my grandfather had learned the trade. He saw lineage, continuation, legacy. He saw me as infrastructure. Necessary, invisible, replaceable. The birthday dinner was in March. My grandmother turned 78. She had made her own cake, which was a yellow sheet cake with cream cheese frosting and a handful of walnuts pressed into the top, because she had been making that cake for every family birthday since 1987, and she was not about to stop. There were 7 of us at the table. My grandparents, my parents, my brother, his girlfriend, and me. I had driven over after work. I was still in the clothes I'd worn to a contract meeting that morning. When my father slid those keys across the table, I watched my grandfather's face. He didn't smile. He looked at the keys, then at my father, then at me. Something moved across his expression that I didn't have a name for yet. It would come to me later. It was grief. He excused himself about 20 minutes after dinner ended, said his knee was bothering him and he wanted to sit in the living room. I went in to check on him after I helped my grandmother clear the table, and he was just sitting in his recliner with the lamp off, looking at the window. I sat on the arm of the sofa closest to him. We didn't say anything for a while. Then he said, "I owe you an apology, Laurel." I told him he didn't owe me anything. He said, "I do. I've known for a long time what your father was going to do, and I didn't stop it. I thought he stopped. Started again. I thought he'd stopped, started again. I thought he'd see sense. I thought he'd do right by you. I didn't say anything." "There's something I should have given you a long time ago," he said. "Come by the house next Saturday. Come alone." I almost didn't go. The week between that dinner and the following Saturday was one of the harder ones I'd had in recent memory. Not because anything dramatic happened at work. Nothing did. It was the ordinary indignity of it. My brother was now being introduced on client calls as the future owner of Hartwell & Sons. I was still the one preparing the materials for those calls. I was still the one who knew where everything was. The Monday after the dinner, my father forwarded me the Indeed listing again. I don't think he even realized he'd already given me the printout. He wrote in the email, "Just want to make sure you saw this. Might be worth exploring." I printed it out and put it in my desk drawer. I drove to my grandparents' house the following Saturday at 10 in the morning. My grandfather answered the door alone. My grandmother was at her garden club. He had planned it that way. He took me to his study, which smelled like machine oil and old paper and the particular cedar of a specific brand of pencil he'd used my entire life. He sat behind his desk and I took the chair across from him, the same chair I'd sat in at 17 while he taught me to read a balance sheet. He opened the bottom drawer and took out a folder. Inside the folder was a document I had never seen. A deed. The deed to a property in Gatlinburg. A small commercial building with a rental unit above it, sitting on about a quarter acre. The deed was dated 2009. The name on it was mine. My name. Laurel Ann Hartwell. I looked up at him. "I put that in your name the year after I handed the business to your father," he said. I watched how he ran things that first year, and I knew what was going to happen. Not the specifics, but I knew you were going to get shorted. He had told no one. Not my grandmother, not my father, not anyone. He had paid the property taxes himself for 14 years out of a separate account my grandmother thought was a boat fund. There was no boat. "The building has been rented continuously since 2011, he said. "There's a bookkeeping office on the ground floor and a residential tenant upstairs. The rent income has been accumulating in an account." He slid another paper across. "I had it structured as a trust in your name. You've had money sitting there for 14 years that you didn't know about." I looked at the number at the bottom of the account statement. I had to read it twice. Then I looked at my grandfather, this man who had taught me to read a balance sheet when I was 17, who had pressed walnuts into birthday cake frosting every year of my life, who had sat in a dark living room and called it grief. And I understood that he had been protecting me for over a decade in the only way he knew how, quietly, carefully, without anyone finding out. "Why are you telling me now?" I asked. "Because I'm not well," he said simply, "and because of what happened at dinner. I won't leave this world with you thinking that nobody in this family saw you. I will not tell you what his diagnosis was or the details of his prognosis. That belongs to him and my grandmother. What I will tell you is that his attorney, a woman named Constance, who I want to be when I grow up, had been managing the trust documents for years, and had a complete file ready for me when I called her the following Monday. I met with Constance for 2 hours. She walked me through the property deed, the trust structure, the account history, and something else, a second document my grandfather had prepared 2 years prior, which amended the original trust to include a specific clause. The clause stated that if the primary Hartwell and Sons business assets were ever transferred without my formal consent and documented acknowledgement, the Gatlinburg property and its accumulated earnings would trigger a competing claim on the Hartwell and Sons business license, because my grandfather, when he had originally established the business in 1979, had registered a silent co-ownership stake in my name as a minor, a thing that was legal in Tennessee at the time and had never been dissolved. My father had never known about it. Why would he? He'd never looked for it. He'd never thought he needed to. When I asked Constance what this meant practically, she said, "It means that the transfer of the business to your brother without your documented consent may not be legally clean, and if your family pursues that transfer, you have standing to challenge it." I sat with that for a moment. "What would you recommend?" I asked. She looked at me over her reading glasses and said, "I'd recommend you let them file the paperwork." The formal transfer of Hartwell and Sons to my brother was scheduled for the second week of May at the office of my father's business attorney downtown. It was presented to me as a formality. I was told I should come and sign a single document as a current employee acknowledging the transition of management. I did not tell my father what I knew. I did not tell my mother. I did not tell my brother, who spent the 2 months between March and May acting as though I were already gone, forwarding me notes with corrections about how I should be filing certain things, as if he had not watched me run that office for 4 years and had somehow developed opinions about my filing system. I went to work every day. I answered the phones. I managed the payroll. I made sure the city contract renewals were submitted on time. And every Tuesday evening, I met with Constance. The morning of the transfer, I put on the same blazer I'd worn to the contract meeting the day my father gave away the keys. I drove downtown. I parked in the same garage I always used. I bought a coffee from the cart on the corner. My father, my brother, and my father's attorney were already in the conference room when I arrived. My brother had a new haircut. My father was in a sport coat. They looked like a photograph of something. My father's attorney slid a document across the table, the employee acknowledgement form, 1 page, standard language. I set my coffee down. I opened my bag. I took out a folder. I said, "Before we proceed, I want to make sure everyone has a chance to review this." Inside the folder, a copy of the 1979 business registration showing the silent co-ownership interest in my name, a copy of the Gatlinburg property deed, a summary memo from Constance outlining the competing claim provision and what it meant for the proposed transfer. The room was quiet for a long time. My father picked up the registration document. He looked at it. He set it down. He picked up the property deed. I watched the color leave his face the way water drains out of a sink. My brother said, "What is this?" I said, "It's something Grandpa set up a long time ago." My father's attorney asked for a recess to review the documents. My father agreed immediately, which told me everything I needed to know about whether he wanted to test this in front of a judge. In the hallway, my father tried to talk to me. He said this could be handled quietly in the family. He said my grandfather would have wanted us to work this out between ourselves. I said, "Grandpa is the one who gave me the folder. He didn't have anything to say to that. We did not go to court. I want to be honest about that, because I know that's what you're waiting for. The moment in the courtroom, the gavel, the justice served in a clean and public way. Real life is rarely that tidy. What happened instead was a negotiation, facilitated by Constance and my father's attorney over the following 6 weeks. The result was a restructured ownership agreement. My brother would hold the majority operational stake in the business, since he was genuinely committed to running the field side of things and had the relationships with the technicians. I would hold a documented minority ownership stake with board-level approval rights on any major financial decisions, a formalized salary commensurate with my actual role, and a defined exit buyout provision if I ever chose to leave. The Gatlinburg property remained entirely mine. The trust account remained entirely mine. My father signed the restructured agreement without looking at me. My brother, to his credit, and I say this as someone who spent years watching him coast, shook my hand afterward and said, I didn't know. I believe him. I don't think he's a bad person. I think he was handed something he didn't earn and he took it, the way most people do when something is simply handed to them. The person who knew was my father. The person who had always known was my father. My grandmother found out about the Gatlinburg property the same week the agreement was signed. My grandfather told her himself. She called me that Sunday and we talked for almost 2 hours. And at some point she said, he always said you were the one who understood how things worked. He said it from the time you were little. I didn't cry during that negotiation. I didn't cry in any of the meetings with Constance. I didn't cry the day my father signed the paper. I cried on that phone call. In my car, in the parking lot of a Kroger, because my grandmother was telling me that someone had seen me, and I was 31 years old, and I had waited a long time to hear it. The Indeed printout is still in my desk drawer. I kept it. I don't know exactly why. Maybe because some part of me needs to remember what it felt like to hold that piece of paper and choose silence. Choose patience. Choose to wait until I had something real to hand them, instead of just feelings, which disappear and can be dismissed. Evidence doesn't disappear. My grandfather knew that. He spent 14 years making sure I'd have it when I needed it. The porch light at the house I grew up in looks the same as it always did. I still drive by it sometimes. I don't stop, but I look, and I think about that Sunday dinner and the brass key sliding across the tablecloth, and my father's face in that conference room when he finally understood what quiet looks like when it's been patient long enough. Some gifts take years to unwrap. The best ones always do. I keep the Indeed printout in my desk drawer. I don't know why I haven't thrown it away. Maybe because it reminds me that the moment you're handed something dismissive, something that says, this is all we think you're worth, you have a choice about what you do next. And that choice is everything. My father made his choice over many years, not just one dinner. He chose who to see and who to overlook, and he was consistent about it in a way that almost looked like conviction. But what he was actually doing, every time he handed me another task without a title or another responsibility without recognition, was building a case he didn't know he was building. Every action has a consequence that compounds quietly in the background, the way interest does, the way trust does, the way a property deed sitting in a folder for 14 years does. My grandfather understood something that I'm still learning to hold on to, that doing right by someone is not always loud. He never made a speech at a dinner table. He never confronted my father directly. He just made sure that when the moment came, I would have something solid in my hands. That is what I think of when I think about integrity. Not the grand gesture, not the public stand, but the quiet decision to do the right thing. Even when no one is watching and no one will know for years. And then there's the matter of being smart about it. Not clever in a cold way, but genuinely informed. I could have walked out of that birthday dinner and filed a complaint, called a lawyer that same week, made noise before I understood what I actually had. I would have lost. What I did instead, and what Constance helped me do, was understand the landscape before I moved. I read the documents. I asked the questions. I waited until I knew exactly what I was holding before I put it on the table. That kind of thinking doesn't come from anger. It comes from discipline, from choosing to be patient with information the same way my grandfather was patient with time. And the endurance part, that's the one nobody talks about because it's not dramatic. It's just showing up. It's 4 years of answering phones and managing payroll and sitting in meetings where you know more than anyone in the room but your name isn't on the door. It's the Monday morning after the birthday dinner when you put on your work clothes and drive to the same office and do your job anyway, because you've decided that the way you carry yourself in the waiting period matters just as much as what you do when the moment finally arrives. I didn't win because I was angry enough. I won because I kept going long enough. Because my grandfather gave me something real, and I was ready to use it when it mattered. The business keys are sitting in my brother's office now. I have a stake in what they open. And in Gatlinburg, a building with my name on the deed has been quietly earning, quietly waiting, the whole time I was wondering if anyone saw me. Someone did. It just took a folder in a conference room for everyone else to finally see it too.